Welcome to A Brief History Conspiracy.
This week, the Younger Dryas.
Hi, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, like the video, and it really does help. So the Younger Dryas event. This is, in our chronology, is 12,800 years ago to about 11,600 years ago. And it is a sudden blip in global temperatures.
Yeah. Some rapid climatic changes occur at the start, through the period, and at the end of the period.
I think we see two very sudden temperature increases of about 10 degrees centigrade, which I think, current climate change panickers are talking. We're really worried about a 2-degree increase in average global temperatures.
Yeah.
This saw a 10-degree sudden increase in global temperatures.
Possibly over a shorter time period than the
Less than
2
a decade,
degree
possibly.
In the last 150 years.
Yeah.
They're talking 10 degrees
and then,
within a decade.
And then
so.
It cooled, and then it happened again. Really, really close together.
Yeah.
And then we saw a return of the ice.
Yeah,
and then,
in the period in between, return of the ice and the glaciers.
And then pretty much a sudden warming again back to sort of the trend temperature sort of thing.
Yeah, pretty much where it was at 12,800 years.
Yeah, because we are talking about a period where we were coming out of the last major ice age. The Earth's temperature, the Earth was steadily warming in this period.
Yeah.
And then there's just this massive blip. Why is it called the Younger Dryas?
Because of the Dryas flower.
Yeah.
And I think
there's an older Dryas flower and a younger Dryas flower.
Okay.
So this Younger Dryas apparently went extinct during this period and then reappeared just after it. So during this period, the Younger Dryas flower disappeared, and after this event, it came back. So
okay.
Simple as that. They named it after a flower. Oh, pretty. Some of the things that really happened though in this period was the pulse water events.
Yeah, the sea level rises that coincided with the massive temperature rises at 12,800 and then again at 11,600 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, the first pulse water 1A would have been something like, even the mainstream science thinks it was about 25 metres, which is just ridiculous. What's that, like 75 to 100 feet in that region?
Which is significant. And the pulse 1B about 15 metres or so.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. The people that talk about this a lot on, and you've got to go Joe Rogan, it's Randall Carlson, a big bearded fellow. I talk about him in my future episode actually quite a lot.
Yes, you did mention him.
Because he talks about climate change and how actually climate change is normal. We shouldn't really worry about it as much as we probably are. And I think Graham Hancock talks about this a lot as well, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
I think they think that these pulse water events probably were more significant than the mainstream they're talking about.
Yeah, hundreds of feet.
Yeah,
suddenly. Instead of 75 feet, maybe. They're talking, hundreds. So...
it's not just a sea level rise, was it, as well? I think we're talking flooding and mass events that would have been pretty much worldwide. I think this is probably whether we get the story in the Bible for the Great Deluge.
Well, that and most other ancient texts that speak of a Great Deluge as well. It's not unique to Christianity
almost
or
every
even the
religious,
Abrahamic faith.
Almost every religious story, which is amazing if you think about it. If this actually is what inspired those stories, that this is a story from 13,000 years ago that we still tell today.
And still pass on.
Just through word of mouth and telling stories. It's
probably tells you the sheer level of destruction that occurred at that point on the planet was that severe, that great. That
the people that survived thought it was worth telling.
and they kept pursuing that generation after generation.
Yeah, and made myths from it, and it would have been terrifying, and I mean it also nearly wiped us out. So I did the last ice age, we went down to about 10,000, and this event, which we're going to talk about in a bit, there was mass extinction events, and I think it was 75% of all the megafauna in North America were died off at 12,800 years ago. We'll come to that in a minute though, but I mean, the other thing is the sea level rises a lot of the mainstream science believe that the sea level rises that we see now, because at the last ice age, sea level was much lower.
Yep.
Anything up to about 100 meters lower, which would be about that 300 feet we were talking about. You see things like England there was no North Sea. We were unfortunately connected to France. So, and then there was much larger land mass than there is now, because the sea levels were much lower, because it was all captured in ice. So we got the sea level rises, but then these pulses would have caused sudden sea rises, and they're not sudden because from coral reef evidence.
Yes, there's a lot of evidence from the coral reefs, isn't there?
Coral reef basically needs to grow at a certain depth where it can get the light, and it doesn't grow. So if it was
so it only grows in the shallow basin, doesn't it, to a certain depth? Yeah,
they found ancient coral from it's basically fossilized coral in the Gulf of Mexico region, and they can see like a step effect. So if sea levels had risen steadily, you'd see the coral just growing up the
you see it layered,
but they don't. They see step, which then suggests a very, very sudden sea level rise,
which coincides perfectly with the with this evidence from the Younger Dryas period of the warming, isn't it?
And you got to remember as well, humanity has always sort of lived near the coast. It's where the most resources are. Yeah. So for humans, they may have moved steadily as sea levels rose, but then having this sudden impact of sea must have been interesting. Yeah. You can see why that we maybe lost a lot of. Why our numbers dropped so dramatically, because almost all of us would have lived near the oceans.
Yeah, I mean today 70%, I think 60 to 70% of the world's major cities are located
within 30 miles of the ocean.
30 miles of the coast, and can't be more than feet or 100 feet above sea level.
Well, you think about almost all of our major cities: New York, Tokyo, London. Almost every major city you can think of either lives near a river, which would have flooded as well, or the rivers would have, chances are, we would have seen massive flooding.
Massive flooding across the floodplains.
Or they're on the coastline. This is where we live, so it would have been a massive impact. We get a lot of this evidence for how this happened from core samples, mainly from Greenland. We dig down and take these ice cores, and then it's
and the poles, I think, as well. Both the poles they're taken from.
What are they looking for when they look at it? It's something to do with isotopes, isn't it? When
I mean, really, basically, it's just the process by which glaciers are formed. There's an intermediate stage between the snow falling, it being compressed into ice. It forms part of the glacier. So when they take ice cores of the glacier, you get layers.
It's like reading a book, isn't it? It's like pages of a book.
Yeah, so you can analyse each layer, which is basically a year's sedimentation of the snow.
And you can see what levels of oxygen, things like this, are in that bit of ice, and you can tell what the environment was like.
We know from our understanding of oxygen isotopes that the temperature alters the what's the word? Yeah, it alters the variation or alters the abundance of the relative of these isotopes.
So dependent on how much isotopes there are is how warm or cold it is.
Yeah, the abundance of different isotopes of oxygen, it tells you temperature basically.
But we have to ask what caused this event then, because was it a natural event? Did something happen? I mean, from our previous videos, we actually know it was the Annunaki. So I don't even know why we're asking this thing. It was Nibiru. We know it was. Nibiru came by. As we've already discussed, Enki wasn't very happy with us, so no, Elil wasn't very happy with us, so he wiped us out. Or God did it. So either way, so that's the end of the video. Done. God did it. Move on.
So the interesting thing is, though, the supposed orbit of Nibiru is a 3,600-year orbital period.
Yeah.
However, the ice core samples tend to show significant events occurring about every 13,000 years or so through the course of human history for the last couple of 100,000 years, as the oldest human remains we know
so
of.
It's every 3 or 4 times it comes past.
I think the oldest Homo sapien remains that we found are about 180,000 years
it's
old.
About 250 now.
It gets pushed back. Is it getting pushed 250 now? Is it okay?
220 to 250, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, it's just I forgot where I was headed with that now.
We're fucked. Every 13,000 years we get battered by something.
Yeah,
and we
no,
don't know
but
what it
I
is.
was saying that the orbital
Yeah.
period of Nibiru is supposedly 3,600 years.
Mm.
Well, that seems too frequent for what the ice core samples are showing us for Nibiru to.
But it wouldn't necessarily
exist.
come close enough to us, necessarily, would it? If it's
Every
orbit, it depends where the Earth is when it comes past.
Yes.
It could be like every 3 or 4 times it comes by, it actually gets close to us. Doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
mean it gets close to us.
No, that's a fair point. Actually,
Or
that is a good point. Yes.
It doesn't exist, which is also
Well,
another
it's also another
possibility.
possibility. Yes. But I just suddenly thought about the time period of that against this 13,000 year destruction cycle that we seem to have on this planet, and
But
they don't quite link. But yeah, that's a very good point.
If we think that maybe it wasn't God, and maybe it wasn't the Anunnaki, are there other causes? What
Well,
are they?
cause the temperature spikes at 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. Well, when you go through a process of elimination, the only option that you're really left with that could cause that kind of level of temperature increase so quickly is a very significant instantaneous event, like an asteroid impact.
Right.
They don't really have any other ideas
Yeah.
of what
think there's-
what to suggest that it could have been. I don't think.
I think there's a scientist, Alan West. He reminds me of Adam West. I immediately started thinking about Batman when I was reading about this guy. I don't know why. Adam West was ace. Yeah, there's been like a discovery of like the thing they call the black mat, which is a sedimentary layer made up of nanodiamonds and carbon spheral things and charcoal soot and all this made in this black line. Like you said about this book.
Similar to the remnants that they find within the black line of the dinosaur extinction 65 million years ago.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah. So, I mean, they're talking about, if you look, like, say, you have this book event of sediment, so sediment layers on top of sediment, you can dig down through it and you can really flick through pages of history.
Yeah, layers of time.
There's sometimes this is called the Clovis extinction event, because there was this Clovis people in North America.
Yeah.
They think there was the first humans in North America. We're going to come back to that in another episode.
I suspect not.
And they can see that in this place called Murray Springs, they're doing the archaeology, and they're finding there's archaeology of the Clovis people. So that, you're finding shards of whatever, arrowheads and pottery and fires, and black mat, nothing. So it would seem that around this period, the Clovis people got a battering.
Yes.
And these carbon spherals and nanodiamonds, they say they are formed by meteor impact, by some sort of massive impact anyway.
Yeah, these observations of these nano particles of certain substances are only known to be present following an asteroid
or
impact.
nuclear blast. Sometimes nuclear blast can
Yeah,
cause the same
sometimes
things.
nuclear can cause...
Nuclear war. Maybe there was a nuclear war. We've already talked about it in the Mars episode. You don't know. No, we're not going that way. We're not going there. So, I mean, they've also think that they recently think they actually found 2 craters that could explain this in the Hiawatha crater, and they think there's actually 2 impact craters very close to each other, but we've only found these recently because we've been able to use satellite imaging because they're under a glacier.
Okay.
So, I mean, the one of these is 31 kilometres across. That's a big impact crater.
Yes.
That's
a significant extinction level event. I'm trying to think what's the crater at the Yucatan Peninsula for the dinosaurs. Although I thought Randall Carlson was speculating that the 12,800 years ago was an asteroid impact into the North American ice sheet. Was that covering over North America and Greenland at that time then?
Greenland would think. I think they're just talking about that ice sheet would have been across the whole area. These 2 in the Hiawatha craters, they've estimated that they're anything from this period to 1 million years old. So these may or may not be but they're a possible site.
They're a possible site for...
We need to go and actually dig down to it, but the problem is it's under like a couple of miles of ice. So it's a bit.
I'm guessing we're not digging that out anytime soon.
No. But actually, with global warming, it'll be tropical there very shortly. So I mean, give it another 10 years, that'll have melted, and we can find out. So, but I agree. I just think if a meteorite hit the ice shelf, hit the north region during this ice age, where the ice did come down past, it would have gone into North America, there may not have been much of an impact crater at all. If you can imagine it hitting ice, it would have melted. It would explain
especially
the meltwater.
Couple of mile thickness of ice. Yeah. Would I think the momentum and the kinetic energy that an asteroid has travelling through space.
We're talking thousands of miles an hour.
We're talking tens of thousands of miles an hour, even maybe 40,000 miles an hour. So something in that sort of ballpark.
Our satellites travel at about 20 to 25,000 miles an hour. So another object is when they hit us, it's 40 to 50,000 miles an hour.
I just think that the sheer kinetic energy that the object has, it probably would still create an impact crater, and it would totally melt the 2 mile thickness of ice with that kind of level of energy.
I could generally see it not being an impact crater. I could generally see it seeing, if it hit the ice where it's reasonably thick, I could generally see no impact crater. Just a massive... Because it'd be...
It's possible there'd be no impact crater. I think there might be, just the sheer energy involved in it. But possible there isn't one.
But if you're thinking about this Hiawatha craters that are 31 kilometres wide. Can you imagine that though? If that had just hit land, normal land, that would have created a much bigger crater potentially, because if it would have had to have gone through the ice first. So that would have taken a lot of the impact, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So
a lot of the energy would have been taken out by the ice.
It's then gone through 2 layers of ice and still created a crater.
Yes.
That big. How big was that object?
Well, precisely, yeah.
That would have thrown... It would have created a nuclear winter. It would have thrown all this meltwater, which would have caused this meltwater pulses that we're talking about, where sea levels would have risen suddenly. But also, it would have thrown significant water into the atmosphere. So you're talking clouds, rainfall, causing flooding worldwide. You'd be talking about fires across vast areas. Which explains why we see soot and shock quartz and charcoal and all these things in this black matte sediment layer. The devastation would have gone far, far further. If anything, I think we maybe be luckily hit the ice.
Because it could have been much more devastating than it was if it hadn't have hit a thick ice, a thick ice sheet. Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, it could have been a lot more devastating if it had hit land.
They talk about there being 2 impacts as well, and actually there are 2 impact craters, 2 impacts 1,200 years apart, that would have caused. So that's not going to be what I mean. Is that's very unlikely they'd have hit the same area.
No. So, they're not sure, are they? I think there's more evidence for there being an asteroid that hit 12,800 years ago because of the similar black line in
the black mat level,
similar to the extinction of the dinosaurs, that we know was caused by an asteroid from our research into that many years ago, to be honest now. But
yes, it's pretty much considered fact now, isn't it?
There's not as much evidence, and I don't think that Randall Carlson has a site in mind for 11,600 years ago. Yeah. But they think that maybe it could have been.
That's just a suspicion, isn't it? I think at the moment they suspect there was a second impact, but they're not sure. There's another massive impact crater at Antarctica as well, which is there's been only very recently discovered, and that's again this sort of size
under an ice sheet again. Under a
massive ice sheet again. So it's so awkward. They're always hiding. They find massive ones in water as well, and you think again, if going through hitting water, which is an amazing shock absorber, and then still hitting we've been hit by very large objects at times.
It's amazing to think, isn't it, at 12,800 years ago that most of North America was covered by a glacial ice sheet that was about, around the Carlson is about 2 miles thickness in diameter. Mm-hmm. And that's where there's cities now. So you're talking New York, Chicago.
Well, we had
That
ice
sort of area,
shelves.
ice sheet.
This far south. I mean, we've got in the Shropshire Hills. There was, which is only a few miles from us, and we're it's sort of in the middle of England. You still see we see evidence of glaciers and glaciation. You can walk up the valleys that were caused by glaciation. So,
Yes. Nature is very, very powerful.
yeah, there are other scientists. I mean, there are arguments about this, of course. There's a William Napier did talk about possibly an airburst, like the Tunguska event.
Yeah.
So when a meteorite hits our atmosphere, sometimes our atmosphere is like water. If you can think of it like that sort of thing. When an object hits, there's massive friction, and sometimes if it hits at the right angle or whatever, you get an airburst where they just explode in the high up. So you don't really get an impact crater at all.
No, I think it's to do with the angle with which it hits. It's coming in from and hits
and
the
depends
atmosphere.
what object it is, what
how
speed,
steep.
it's all sorted.
And velocity is another big one. Yeah.
And then when you get these big air bursts, I mean, the Tunguska event, what is it? It would blow down like 2 million trees or something. If that had happened over a
something
city,
like 2 million square miles.
Yeah, now that would be really big.
No,
2 million square miles.
No, it's not that big.
I'm sure it's like something like 2 million trees it knocked down. But
was it 20,000 square miles?
It was something like that.
It was
massive,
something in that sort of.
We were very lucky it hit an unpopulated area. I don't think there's like 3 people die or something silly. There's like one bloke in a cabin in the middle of nowhere who they think died. Other than that, there were no deaths.
It might have been just 2,000 square miles. There's still the epicenter of the Tunguska impact is still completely flat grassland where no trees, nothing grows. It's just very simple grass vegetation.
We'd love to know then.
Nothing can grow in that point anymore for some reason.
We'll definitely look into that when it comes up.
Yeah.
But so William Napier argues that there's no impact crater because possibly something bigger than over Tunguska, maybe it airburst. And I can understand that as well, because if something airburst, this is why we airburst nuclear weapons. When we fire a nuclear weapon, we don't hit the ground with it and explode. They're designed to explode in the air because there's more devastation that way. More of the energy impacts the ground, sort of thing, rather than it being absorbed by the ground. So if you had a very large object airburst, all that energy would be spread out, and it would potentially melt the ice very quickly, cause fires thousands of miles away. This is possible. Dr. Bosber, I'm going to go Bosber. He argues that the math doesn't make sense for that. And if it was that big, it wouldn't airburst. It would come through our atmosphere like a hot knife through butter sort of thing.
I think I'll probably tend to go with Dr. Bosborough on this one.
Yeah.
I think if it's too large in size, it also depends on density as well. It's not just the size of the object, the momentum it has.
And you also assume it's only one object. Sometimes these things break up, and it's more than they could hit us 3 or 4 like a shotgun. We could have several objects hit us all at once. So they could be air bursts and not a large impact.
Yeah, of course. One could hit the sea, one could hit land.
Yeah, there's no reason to think that it's just one impact.
There is one thing I do really like in that Randall Carlson discusses, where he ventures around the eastern coast of America, and he was showing Graham various features in the landscape that he says are evidence of a very traumatic experience North America went through in the recent past in this Younger Dryas period.
That's Graham Hancock, isn't it? He talks a lot. He appears on Joe Rogan a lot with Randall Carlson, doesn't he?
He does, yes.
A firm believer in that this event was almost like a reset for humanity, doesn't he? And
yeah, he does believe that, and I think Randall Carlson provides a lot of evidence to back up Graham Hancock's theory.
Yeah.
In particular, the thing I was going to mention was with regard to how you get ripples by the side of a river or a stream where water flows, and you get little peaks and troughs. And if you've got a couple of feet of water, you might get a centimetre of amplitude on the peaks and troughs of the pattern the river and the water flow lays in the sediment at the side.
Yeah.
Well, Randall Carlson shows that on the eastern states of America, that there are ripples in hills that have amplitude of 50 feet.
So that's a lot
which
of water.
is showing that a lot of water flowed through.
Suddenly as well.
Suddenly. Yeah. Which this is where I think that he's really starting to provide some evidence for there being an asteroid impact that hit the North American ice sheet that caused the rapid melt, and then that meltwater going back to the sea has shaped the American landscape. Also explain why we have very few tales of any North American cultures or civilizations existing. In the last 10,000 years.
This Clovis people, I mean, there is evidence to suggest they actually tried to migrate south, but around 9,000 years ago they died out anyway, and there's no understanding of why that happened, but unless, well, I would say it's bloody obvious that there was massive climate
change,
variation, and
massive extinction of the megafauna. 75% of the large mammals in America disappeared. It's probably the food source of that people disappeared.
Yeah, and it would have took a long time to recover. Now, this Clovis extinction event, there's argument about that in mainstream science, and genuinely, I actually think the argument here is borderline funny, that they argue that as humans and the Clovis people migrated through Greenland into North America, and we just went on a mass killing spree and just slaughtered everything in our path. I mean, we got a bloodlust for for a couple hundred years, and we made the mammoth extinct virtually on our own. There is pockets of mammoths, I think, for much later, which I think the change of environment and warming would have finished them off, but yeah, I mean, there's images of like mammoth graveyards with literally hundreds of skeletons and things, and we went on a killing spree, and that is the mainstream theory. Yeah, that we slaughtered everything in our path.
I don't buy it, to be honest. I think it's clutching at straws.
Mammoths are quite big. We didn't go on they're not puddy cats.
No,
we didn't go on a mass puddy cat killing spree. We could have done that.
We might have killed some of them, and we might have eaten some of them and used them as a food source. I believe that, but I don't think we would have had. Well, one, supposedly humans, we didn't have enough numbers coming out of the last ice age.
We also didn't have elephant guns.
Well, we had spears. We didn't have the technology that we now have for killing larger animals. And also, I think that they think that the woolly mammoth population far surpassed the human population at this point in history.
Yep.
So
how hungry were we?
I
mean, even today, we still drag up bones and tusks of woolly mammoths from the North Sea. When they're fishing in the North Sea, fishermen are constantly dragging up these bones, and they have to send them back to the natural. It happens all the time. It's littered with bones.
There are a lot of mammoths.
There were a lot of mammoths, and they're big. How hungry were we? But also, it was that we slaughtered everything else as well. This is a theory that literally makes no sense.
You don't see people killing elephants in Africa or Asia today, do you, for food very frequently?
No, and they got. I mean, it's a good food source. Don't get me wrong, but it's a very dangerous food source to go after. They're big,
which is why we don't go after it today. Yeah. Also, they're endangered. That probably does also make a difference in the fact that we're not legally allowed to.
We're idiots. We like the tusks. We don't eat the animal, do we? We cut the tusks off.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. A lot of some of the people that argue this, though, say, well, look what we did with the bison and in North America, and the buffalo. We virtually made them extinct. There was vast herds, and we just went on. It's a nonsense simile to make, though. It's a nonsense. There's no connection between those two things. For one, we had guns when we decided to destroy the buffalo. Yeah,
which kind of the technology made a big difference.
And there were political reasons why we were hunting them as well. And there was money on the hide and things. And it was at a time when we were moving east across America, and there's stories about us that we partly did it to take out the Indians as we were trying to remove their food source. And there's political reasons anyway why we did that. But also, the big difference is we had guns, which makes it a lot easier.
Yep, certainly does.
So no, I don't buy that in the slightest. There was a massive extinction level event, and I don't think humanity for once had anything to do with it. We were innocent. This once. This is the only time we're innocent when it comes to environmental disasters. Every other time we're totally guilty.
I think the buffalo
This
or
time we're
the
innocent.
bison also being the main food source of the Indians.
Native Americans, yeah.
Yeah, probably meant that they had part to do with the extinction of it as well as us.
But the thing is, actually, literally, they were pretty good at like balancing it, and
they did have a much better balance with nature.
There's a story. I don't know how accurate it is,
Westerners
but there's a
do.
story that we wanted to damage the Native American tribes as much as we could, and one of the ways we could do that was remove the buffalo, which they considered to be, there was a spiritual element to it as well for them. So that's one story. I don't know how accurate it is. I think we just like the furs as well. We needed the furs, but. Because a lot of the time we didn't even eat the meat, we skinned them and just sold the furs. So there's just, you see images of just like vast fields of buffalo just with no skin on it. It's horrible. Humans are shit. We really are horrible.
We certainly can be.
But there are other theories of what could cause this. Now I have a little theory. We're worried at the moment about climate change and there being what we call like a runaway greenhouse effect.
Okay, yep.
So basically our ice sheets are melting, which is, however much carbon we release into the atmosphere, nature is far better at it. I was watching a thing about in Greenland, and there's this like thermo power station next to a volcano. So they squirt water into the ground, the volcano heats the water up, that comes back up as steam and drives the turbines. But they release quite a lot of CO2 from this power station. So they're trying to capture it. And there's this big process about how they basically carbonate water. So squirt the carbon into water, then squirt that into the ground. That dries, and then the carbon gets captured in the rock. So it's a really good way of capturing it. They capture about a third of the CO2 they release in a year, and that's about 100,000 tonnes of carbon. So that sounds great.
Yeah.
The volcano releases 1.7 million tonnes of carbon every year, and it's not active. When it's active, it's like far more than that. Yes. Nature releases loads of carbon, but also a lot of that carbon is then captured in our ice. So when the ice melts, carbon gets released. A lot of the climate change worry is that as our polar ice caps are melting, that's going to then release far more CO2 than anything we release, and we could get a runaway effect.
Yeah, it's the same with the oceans. The oceans capture it as well, but as they heat up, they release some of the captured into the atmosphere. As the oceans cool, they will absorb some of the carbon from the atmosphere and put it back into the sea to perhaps be put down as sediment. You know,
as algae blooms things as well as algae absorbs a lot of CO2 in the oceans, and if you get large algae blooms, they absorb CO2. But then, depending on the climate, it affects their population. So there's lots of this natural effects going on. I wonder whether this could have actually been that the ice sheets were melting, we were coming out of the last ice age, and could have this blip been caused by a runaway greenhouse effect? They may not. I mean, it could have caused some sort of sudden. Now, I wonder if it's possible, but it seems too dramatic to me. It seems too. We're talking,
I don't know. I think. Do you not think the process would be a bit slower for a runaway greenhouse effect? Like
That's what I mean.
We've been pumping a lot of carbon into the atmosphere for 150 years.
Yeah.
And do you know what I mean?
Like I say, the ice shelf can release far more CO2 than we can, but it doesn't. I don't think it explains. So this is only a theory. It's just something I thought about, but I don't really think it holds water, if I'm honest, because I don't think it explains the sudden sea level rises.
No. I tend to agree.
But I think it's something to consider and to look into. Maybe somebody much cleverer than me can look into it. There are other theories. There's a bloke called Charles Hopgood who's a big believer in sort of the slippage of the crust.
No, Earth crust displacement theory, wasn't it?
I mean, his book
mentioned it in that film 2012.
Yeah, it's a good film.
Where they make the theory, where they make him look like a nutter conspiracy theorist.
The neutrinos are excited. That's how the film starts. The neutrinos are excited, and that's what's causing the thing. They never mention neutrinos again in that movie.
No.
But if you watch the first couple of minutes, it's like, what's he on about? And then they never mention it again. But neutrinos.
They needed a word, didn't they, that most of the general
Neutrinos are
population
excited.
didn't understand as to why the land was falling in on itself.
Yeah. But this Charles Hopgood, he was around the 30s. He talked to, I mean, his book had a foreword by Einstein. So that gave a bit of,
Yeah, a bit of credibility.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, I'd like my book forwarded by, Stephen Hawking or something. And anyway, the theory basically was that we didn't actually have an ice age. What we had was the ice. The North Pole was just in a different place. The crust had slipped. The North Pole, instead of being where it is today, was about 2,000 miles to the east. And basically, the North Pole was where North America is. And this explains why there actually wasn't ice in sort of like the Alaska regions in the last ice age, and the parts of the tundra in North Russia, where they think that the ice didn't come down sort of in an even long latitude. It's sort of, so he sort of said like that it had slipped.
Yeah, that the Earth's crust had moved on its axis of orbit, so that
and we know this happens a bit. We know it's happening today. The true North Pole just shift a bit. They're worrying about the North and South Pole are going to flip, aren't they? And we're not really sure how that's going to. And that we know that happens sometimes. And they're a bit worried about what's going to happen. Somebody was saying, our satellites will be confused. It's not the satellites. Our magnetic field is what protects us from the sun, and it's weakening. And they're talking about it flipping. I'd be more about what does the magnetic
field
about
the
ultraviolet
radiation and the lack of protection from it in that period. Yes, my advice would be stay indoors if the pole shifts.
Sunscreen.
Just stay indoors. Just stay out of direct sunlight for a while.
I think we might have
years,
1,000 years maybe.
It depends how quick the poles shift and how quick the magnetic field would.
You ever see the RoboCop when they say there's RoboCop has little adverts during it, and someone's like, new sunscreen 2000 is like putting a blue sludge on their heads to protect them from the. I can have hours in the sun. It's like covered in this blue crap. But that might be what we have to do. But so there's some credence to this theory. Him and Einstein argued about it, and basically Einstein told him it was nonsense eventually. But
I suppose the Earth crust displacement theory is a possible alternative explanation for the fields of suddenly frozen megafauna that we find both. I think it's mostly in Siberia, isn't it, that they find a lot of these suddenly frozen.
I mean, they found one recently, didn't they? They sort of melted it, didn't they? And sort of there's a big thing how they sort of defrosted it and found it like
was it a baby? I think it was a baby one, wasn't it? Was it quite small?
The one I saw was an adult, but it's still mental that it was still basically stood up, but it was frozen solid.
There was one that I was reading about that when it when the ground shifted and it came out of the permafrost, this mammoth, it was supposedly from about the last ice age, for about 12,000 years ago or so. The meat was that fresh on it that the wolves came in and started eating the meat off of the.
Bloody hell!
And that's 10,000-year-old meat that they're eating. Yeah. That was, but apparently the meat looked that good. It was that marbleized. It was like it was frozen yesterday. Yeah. So they really were frozen,
full bellies and all sorts, aren't they? Like they still be. That's that movie Day After Tomorrow, isn't it? They talked about storms that would then sucking air in from the troposphere and causing sudden freezing.
The centre of the storm being ridiculously cold and causing
minus 70, 80 degrees centigrade sort of thing, and just causing sudden fast freezing.
It's quite an interesting film. I did quite like the premise.
I love that movie. It's a great movie. Yeah. And then all the wolves escape the zoo and start eating everyone. Oh, it's a great film. I like anything with Dennis Quaid in, to be fair. He's just one of those actors. I was like, he's always done some good films.
So as I was saying, so I like the Earth crust displacement theory as an alternative to the asteroid impact into the North American ice sheet.
Yeah, in some ways it explains other aspects of the thing. You're thinking if there was a sudden shift, and suddenly
North America that was more over the North Pole shifted, and then it pushed Siberia more over the North Pole, that would cause that sudden freezing of the.
You have to wonder what that would do to the weather patterns and things, isn't it? What could that trigger? What sort of?
Well, it's.
I don't think we have any any idea how
It's
or
even-
what that would be like on the planet. I think it also, you'd see volcanoes go off. You'd see
It's difficult to
you know.
speculate because
Yeah.
I mean we don't.
the shock to the planet would be dramatic, to say the
Yeah.
least. I think this theory's pretty much been dismissed over
Dismissed
the
or
years.
disproven. Over
But then
the
there's
years.
things like the Piri-Reis maps, which
Yes.
are, if you don't know, but it's basically a map that shows, or is believed to show, Antarctica, but without any ice on it.
Yes.
Um,
Although Antarctica has had ice on it for
yeah,
thousands of years. But this map, the Piri-Reis map, dates back to the 16th
There's
century or 1600s.
Yeah, it's the 1600s, but then it's supposed to have been copied from another map.
Yes,
no
a much
longer
earlier map.
exists. So, I mean, this is used as evidence, but I mean, some argue that actually it's not a map of Antarctica anyway. It's a map of South America. It's just not very good. So, it shows it sort of coming down and then coming round, and they're saying that they just weren't as good at doing maps back then. Others argue that this is evidence that mankind was seafaring far earlier than we ever thought possible. Because I mean, at the time of this map was done, we still hadn't discovered Antarctica, even at that period.
Yep.
So, and we hadn't sailed in this area. But we know that history resets all the time. We generally believe we were the first to find America. I never understood it. Christopher Columbus discovered America. It was full of people. Where was he discovering it from? It's like,
precisely.
I name this land America, and all the Native Americans going, hello, excuse me, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then the Vikings are there going, we found that ages ago, we had about. It's like,
History's written by the winners, isn't it? And I take history with a bit of a pinch of salt sometimes.
exactly, yeah.
Because we're very, what's the word? We're very arrogant in making these claims of discovery.
But if crustal slip theory is true, though, when this would have slipped, Antarctica would have been much closer to the equator, potentially.
With a much more temperate climate.
Could it have been a populated continent? Potentially.
Quite possibly, yeah.
And Antarctica sounds like Atlantis. The words are very similar. There's like 3 or 4 of the letters are like the same.
Not as similar as the Atlantic Ocean. I suspect it's still an island chain that's sunk in the Atlantic. That would be my main guess, just based on the naming of the ocean.
Because of the letters used.
Yeah, it seems most likely to me.
Yeah.
Occam's razor. That would be where I put my money. Although Bright
Yeah.
Insight does do a good video to suggest that the Eye of the Sahara may well have been the city of
The next
Atlantis.
couple of episodes
But this
we're
is
getting
another
into
episode.
Atlantis. Yeah, the next couple of episodes we're getting into Atlantis. But it is important to say that Plato argues that Atlantis was destroyed in the period of the Younger Dryas.
Yes.
So 11,600 years ago is the date, roughly, that he gives
Plato
for,
gives.
that
yeah,
Plato gives for
he
Atlantis
said
being destroyed.
that corresponds with the second warming event of the Younger
Yeah.
Dryas and meltwater
second-
pulse 1b.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're basically saying that sea levels rose, and then there's a myth about that Plato wrote a story about an ancient civilization being drowned. Coincidence?
Coincidence that there was massive sea level rise at that exact time that he said
Exactly.
that the city sunk into the ocean.
In a period where we would have lived near the coast, so or on islands or whatever.
When
There
Pla-
are.
And the fact that Plato also claimed to be a historian and wrote historical records
Yeah.
called the Critias and the...
I think he would have then used it for political reason, like
No.
we do. Well, the Bible
Yeah, of course.
is basically a big story telling a story of Christianity, but also then telling us how we're supposed to live and morals and things like this. We tend to use stories to try to teach, don't we?
We do, yeah.
Plato was potentially doing that. He was taking an historical event, but then he was trying to teach the current Greek thing that
He's trying to make a good story out of it so that it'd be passed on and taught
Yeah.
to the next
But
generation.
there's a moral lesson in there, isn't there? That if the Atlanteans were supposed to have annoyed the gods, weren't they, with their decadent lifestyle, and that's why the gods destroyed Atlantis. We can assume that was probably Plato adding that on to try to teach a moral lesson to the current Greek people, that if we have a decadent lifestyle, the gods are going to smite us, sort of thing. But that doesn't mean the Atlantis story is false.
No.
The Troy story, that was a similar thing, that where they tried to then add a moral thing on. The story sort of got expanded on, and they tried to get lessons in it, and then everyone thought it was a myth. And then we found it.
Troy.
So,
I just wouldn't discount all of these ancient historical records, such as Plato, as just myth. Maybe they were trying to teach us things. Maybe they were accurate historical records, or as accurate as he could be, talking about something that happened 9,000 years before his predecessor Solon. You know,
for me, it's quite simple. I mean, we're going to go into the next episode, and we're going to really go on about where we think Atlantis might have been. But I think in this now, if we talk about two questions really: could there have been an ancient civilization in that period? And if there was, would we have evidence of it today? And I think until Göbekli Tepe and other things, we've found now that we were building cities at this time. Göbekli Tepe is an incredibly complicated site that we're going to be doing once we've sorted Atlantis out. We hit Göbekli Tepe. We know that places like Jordan and places like this, and Jericho, were populated possibly at this time. They were building cities. There is evidence to say we were, as humans, building cities in this time period.
Yes.
So, could we have built Atlantis? Yeah. Could it have been on an island that was then sunk? Yeah.
Yep.
Would we then have evidence of it? Potentially not.
Well, we now know that islands or landmass can sink back into the sea. We know that. Know that that's actually a possibility.
Crust can be quite dynamic, yeah.
Yeah, so some we see mountain ranges rising at points where continents are drifting into each other. We see the ocean floor pulling apart, where they're drifting apart from each other, and new volcanic material coming up and forming ridges really in oceans. And
I saw a documentary years ago, and it was a guy, it was in Yellowstone Park, and he said he was the ranger sort of thing there. So one of the days he was going on his normal route, which he did like once a week or so, and he drives up over this ridge and expecting to see this large lake, and it was gone. And it had gone over, like, it had only been like about a few days since he'd been there previously. It had gone. The earth had rised up in that area by about 30 metres. And obviously then the water just sank away, sort of thing, just disappeared, sort of thing. Nobody had known this had happened. The only reason they know it happened was because this ranger was on his route and found it. I mean, obviously that's a dynamic area of a lot of volcanic activity.
Yes.
But this happened rapidly, and nobody knew anything about it.
Perhaps terra firma isn't as firm as we think it is.
Well, we know, yeah, well, exactly. So to go on about, to go back to it like Atlantis or something as well, I don't think anybody can genuinely argue. What's that term they keep using for this? Pseudoscience.
Yes.
I think anybody that sometimes 2 and 2 makes 4, right? And I don't think you can necessarily argue Atlantis exists, and then these people that found it, they say they found evidence of it. Nothing's been conclusive yet.
Yep.
But I can see a couple of problems anyway. I can see as problems finding this. Oceans tend to be quite muddy places, and you get a lot of sediment.
Yes, yes.
So if there was an ancient city, for one, if there was a sudden flood, that would cause massive devastation. It could literally wash away quite a lot of the evidence. But for two, if this then sank under 100 metres of ocean, which we know the oceans rose by about 100 metres over this period to today's levels, it's going to be under 100 metres of water, which is well within our means of exploring.
Exploring now, yeah, totally. So I think that's where we're going to start gathering more evidence for these past civilizations, perhaps even pre 12,800 years ago.
Yeah,
we need to start looking within this 100 metres under the sea, and that there have been.
But it's also going to be under potentially how many metres of sediment. That's the problem.
Well, that is the problem as well. So you've got to look for perhaps areas. I would look at like we said, look at the world map as it was at 12,800 years ago, before the before the several hundred feet of sea level rise that occurred, and look at where the coastline was then, and look at all the land that is now underwater that wasn't 12,800 years ago, and then look for areas where sedimentation is known not to occur as well as perhaps some other areas, and focus on those areas to try and find. And
we're going to have to use some
structures,
ground penetrating radar or something as well, couldn't we? That could potentially find us if we look in the right place.
They have already done this across the Mediterranean, haven't they?
But they found a lot of underwater
structures.
Things. There's one that
coast of Japan as well. There's one massive monolithic site off the coast of Japan.
We're gonna talk about all these sites in our next episode, and we're going to try to see if we can figure out it. I don't think we can argue there wasn't an Atlantis. I don't know if the people of Atlantis called it Atlantis, or if that's just a name we've picked up. But I don't think you can argue there wouldn't have been an ancient city that was lost. We're going to talk about the sites that we think that, like, there's the Eye of the Sahara. There's a large island off the country of Ireland. It's very annoying that Ireland is called Ireland when you then talk about islands near Ireland. It's very difficult to get your tongue around. They really need to change the name, just to help us. That would be great. But there's a large island off the west coast of Ireland that sort of fits some of Plato stuff. There's the Eye of the Sahara. There's places in the Mediterranean that's potential, like you said, that are lost cities.
See, also there, we could also be also still looking in the wrong place for Atlantis, because we do know that there are certain places where there'd be like a plateau that's slowly rising, and over thousands of years it's risen miles.
Yeah.
Well, if that can happen, maybe land can subduct as well. Yeah. So you could even have something that's now a mile down in the ocean. On the ocean floor, that was where Atlantis was.
Well, we know Antarctica's rising, don't we? Because the ice is melting, so there's less weight. So the ice actually pushes the ground down. As it melts, it's rising up. There's also volcanic stuff going on as well, but it's rising up. Last ice age, lots of ice melted. It might have changed the dynamics of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. And hence Atlantis was lost to the sea overnight. That's how Plato describes it. It was lost under the waves. The whole city, the island city, was lost under the waves. And
there could have been some sort of volcanic event as well, which also could potentially can do this sort of thing. Volcanoes can create land and they can destroy very dramatically. And again, if that's happened though, there will be no evidence potentially. It could be under lava, which is, if that's the case, then it'll be pretty much gone. The only reason we found Pompeii is because it's on land.
Mother Earth eventually reclaims everything.
Yeah, we come from the Earth and we go back. So yeah, that's the next couple of episodes. We're going to be talking about Atlantis. We're going to be talking about human migration, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Because there's some that argue that maybe humanity had actually pretty much migrated across the Earth pretty much before the Younger Dryas event, and the Younger Dryas event was like a reset.
Yeah, I think I do agree with Graham Hancock. I do think it was probably a reset point, and that we probably did have some kind of civilization prior to this. Perhaps just not with the same focus that we have now. Perhaps personal transportation wasn't a thing for them back then, and they didn't need that, and decided not to go down that route, or they decided not to go down the route of manufacturing plastics. They decided that they didn't need plastics, or we're looking for things that we've developed now in this modern world, but an advanced civilization may have been just as advanced, but not gone down the same exact path that we've gone down.
Could have been like the Native Americans were very much, their theory and their way of living was to be in balance with nature and life, and they believed these things. So if you had a large, I don't think we're talking about a technologically based, up to our level now maybe, but if you had a pretty advanced civilization that believed in that, and believed in trying to be in balance with things, there might not be that much evidence.
No, there might not be as much as we would. There would be a lot more left from our civilization probably now than what we find from past civilizations.
Because we build with steel and glass and
well,
things like this. And
this is what how long do you think it takes for the Earth to reclaim a car?
I have no idea, but
Not long, several hundred years gone.
Yeah, because it just
Still
rusts away. Yeah, we have galvanised steels and things like that, don't we? And
well, we do, and there are certain things that would survive that we've created today.
But that's another thing we're going to
10,000 years, but still not a lot. There's not
something else we're going to be able to discuss, isn't it? Is that there might have been evidence left behind by an ancient empire potentially. We have to ask how old the pyramids are, how old other sites are around the world. There seems to be areas like Stonehenge, Adam's Calendar that we've already discussed, places like this that seem to be
Good and Padang,
that are built in very similar ways, could be far older than we have any idea. We don't know why they were built. Could they have been meeting points for an ancient empire? Could they have been an area like, that when the sun is in this place at Stonehenge,
we'll meet here.
The Atlanteans came, and that's when we met and we did the thing.
Quite possible.
When we talk about Stonehenge, we're going to talk about that they found bones from lambs from Scotland there. So it was a meeting point. It seemed to be a meeting point, an annual or a regular place that people from all over Britain used to go to. You have to ask why.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have boardrooms back then, so they had to meet somewhere.
Yeah. No telephone conferencing. They had to do that. So that I think, that's where we're going with the next couple of episodes, isn't it? And this Younger Dryas event, however much mainstream science argues about what caused it, we can see that there was a massive event, and the argument for could have that been a reset for the human population? We have to argue yes. That's our Younger Dryas event. Next is Atlantis, which we really get into it, and then we're going into Göbekli Tepe and the pyramids and all that, which I love that stuff. I love the pyramids particularly.
Yeah. So, I think there would be some very interesting episodes to come.
Pyramids were a power station. I'll get into that. It was really neat. That's one of those sort of theories that you told me once, and I went, "Yes, Damien, the pyramid was a power station." Okay, have another drink, mate, and calm down. And then I started watching some documentary, and I was like, "Shh, the pyramids might have been a power station." Because I was
thought, definitely,
yeah, because I'm not thinking of it like a power station, maybe like today, but just to light up a light bulb would have been like magic to them people. So yeah, that's where we're going. Thanks very much, and see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time.